Okay, I wanted to go over how to use a boilerplate, what a boilerplate is, how to use FTP to transfer files to your host, such as Reclaim Hosting, and then how to work locally and then push your content using FTP up to the server. When we work in Codepen, let me refresh this. This is just a simple page I set up for testing this process. What I want to do is add a little HTML, a little CSS, and a little JavaScript. Now that's all we see here, right? But we know that there's like more HTML that has to do something. If I export from Codepen, something a little bit confusing happens. So here's my Codepen export. If we look in it, well, first of all, there's a README and a license, but then there's two folders, source and dist. And if I take source and I drag it into a code editor, I'm going to use Atom here, and we look at the code, it looks exactly like what we wrote in Codepen. There's no extra anything there. So that's source. What if I take dist and I drag that into Atom? I can tell you right now, the JavaScript and CSS are going to look exactly the same. They don't need any setup or linking to other files, but your HTML is going to have way more code. To be exact, it has all this stuff at the top and all this stuff at the bottom. And that's the difference between working in Codepen and working locally. We would want a file that starts with this kind of setup stuff, and that is called a boilerplate. Before we get to that, I just want to clarify that source is supposed to be your work in progress, and dist file is intended for distribution. That's what that stands for. Now, in terms of Codepen, when we download something, we want to work from dist, because otherwise it'll be incomplete. But rather than talking about working from Codepen, how do we get a setup like this just to start with? And what I mean is, how do we have a HTML file that already has all this stuff in the head? It's already linked to a style sheet in the JavaScript file. Well, that's what a boilerplate is. And on our Moodle page, I have added a website boilerplate. So I'm going to click that and download it. It shows up as a zip file, which probably automatically opens up. And here is boilerplate. So what I would encourage everyone to do is take this boilerplate, get it out of your downloads folder, and put it someplace where you're going to, use it a lot. What we're going to want to do here, let me get rid of this zip file because we don't need it anymore, is take this boilerplate, and every time we're going to make something like a website, we want to duplicate that folder, and then I'll call this website just to be incredibly specific. And let's see what we have. If I bring this into a code editor, what is our starting point? Well, our style sheet has a couple of rules in there that are good for just kind of general use. You can always delete it. But for instance, this makes images responsive. Your index.js has a setup where it's going to make sure your whole page is loaded, HTML and CSS, before you run your code. That's usually a good idea, so you just put your code here. Again, you could delete that if you needed to, but I wouldn't. And the most complicated file at this point is going to be our HTML. So this is an HTML file without anything, any content. If we were to preview it, it's totally blank. It's just a blank white page. So what's going on here, just really quickly, this is declaring the type of document that it is. Specifically, it's declaring that it's an HTML5 document as opposed to an earlier version. Everything in here is going to be HTML. Our language is English, so a site like Google can translate it. The character set, aka our keyboard, it's using the UTF-8 character set. This is a tag that will adjust, or it will prevent zooming when you go to mobile, zooming out primarily. Okay, so here's our link to our style sheet. This is where the head closes, the body is where you would put all your content, and here's a link to a JavaScript file, which we saw a minute ago is totally blank. This commented out bit is if we wanted to link to jQuery, for instance. There's not a jQuery file in here. So how do we use this? We just go between the body tags and write whatever we want. So I'll put in a hello world and close it. Now, after I save that, I don't see the results, right? So what is the difference between working locally and working in Codepen? Well, the primary thing is you need to know where your files are. Right, I'm on the desktop in this folder called website. your home page is always going to be index.html. So if I double click that, I'll see it and confirm that I have done something, right? Let's go one more step, and I'm going to say in our body tag, I'll say text align center and save that. And so if I go back to this page still open here and hit refresh, I should see the results. So in other words, Codepen has this cool thing which is like a live code editor. As you type, it changes. And when we're working locally, at least in Atom, we aren't able to use that. Brackets does have a live preview function, but the more complicated your site gets, the less reliable it is. Okay, so now we have some content, right? I've edited this a little bit, and now we have basically, I guess we could say, a really, really simple website living in this folder on my desktop called website. So how do we get that to a server so people can actually see it? Well, the way we would do that is by using an FTP or file transfer protocol application. There are a ton of these. Don't pay for FTP, it should be free. In fact, you can do it in most operating systems. The FTP program that we have been recommending for a while now is called CyberDuck. It's at cyberduck.io. It's free. It will ask you for donations. Fetchsoft works. If you are on a Mac, there is Fetch, and you can download this, and it will bug you a little less about buying it. I'll work from CyberDuck today. So again, you would just click this download button or this download button. It's a little confusing because it says it's in the Mac App Store, and if you go there, I think it costs like $30 or something. A little bit confusing. Well, if we download and install this application, what does it look like? Well, let me point out that mine will run a little bit different than y'all's because mine already is set up. And so I've got these bookmarks that automatically connect. And so we can see that if I connect to a server, these are all the files that are on my server. And then if I've got website, I can basically just drag it straight over and let go. Now I'm going to show you how to set this up, but let me just clarify what's going on here. I am on student.elon.edu/bwalsh5. Anyone that has an email address from Elon has a student.elon.edu, including you, /bwalsh5. But if you go there right now, it will say not found. And that's because there's no content there. So a space has been reserved for you on Elon's student server, but it's empty. So how do we put stuff there? Well, here's my folder, I guess you could call it, in this location. And if I type in index.html, you'll see I'm actually looking at, that's what the name of this page is. Similarly, if we go to apple.com and I add /index.html, that's the name of the page we're looking at. Why is that? Index is a magic file name that browsers automatically look for when they're directed into a folder or directory. And if it's there, it'll show it. So here's mine. So how do we get website up here? What we want to do is make it so when someone goes to bwalsh5/website, they're going to see content. And right now that's empty. So I'm going to take my website. Again, I'll go over how to set this up in a bit. And I'm going to upload it. So I'm uploading a folder called website. Again, not very specific. And it has an index.html in it. And let's see how this is going. It says it's complete. I'm going to refresh. And there's my hello world. And you can see that it's actually on a server. Now, it's easy to get mixed up about if you're working locally or online. So here is the version we were looking at before. And you can see it says file at the beginning. This says not secure because I'm not running from HTTPS, but this says file. And then it shows the path to this file on my desktop. And this doesn't. This is showing the path to the file on a server. So how do we get CyberDuck set up to be able to connect to a server? Well, for many of you, you're going to want to do this using Reclaim Hosting. And if you Google Reclaim Hosting FTP, you'll find this link, which tells you how to set it up. I've read through it, and basically what it told me is you have an FTP account already set up for you. And I believe it's based on how you log in to, let's see, it says your cPanel credentials, which I believe you all have seen. And the screenshots in here are actually from using CyberDuck. So it should be pretty straightforward. But let me show you how to set up as, I don't have an account with Reclaim, so I'm going to show you how to set this up just with our student.elon.edu account. Okay, so I'm back in CyberDuck, and what I'm going to do is click New Connection or Open Connection. Now for y'all, this will be one of your only options because you haven't connected to anything yet. So Open Connection or Connect to Server. Now each server has its own settings, and as you saw over here when we were looking at FTP, there are specific settings you have to type in for the name of the server, even for what type of FTP you're using. And again, your username and password is obviously going to depend on where you're connecting to. So I'm just going to give the settings for the student.elon.edu server, which again, all of you have access to. It requires, instead of using FTP, that we use SFTP or SSH, an encoded method of passing files. So, by the way, does Reclaim hosting. So the first thing you do is change that. Then asks us for our server, and that for me is student.elon.edu. Now, note I'm not putting in any www, any HTTP, anything like that. And I'm also not putting in my /bwalsh5. I'm connecting to the server here. What will we do over here for Reclaim? It looks like you would enter your actual URL without anything in front of it. It also specifies you need to use port 22 here, I believe. For my username, I hope I get this right. This is my Elon username for like email and password. So let me hit connect and see if that worked. It's going to think for a bit. Okay, and then it connected. Now for y'all, you won't see files here, right? You would have to upload something. How do you upload something to show up so you don't see something like this? All you really need to do is take an index.html and drag it into this empty folder. So here's mine, and if I preview that, you'll see this is what it looks like without CSS. And so if you were to upload that and then go to that URL, which would just be your root here, enter, you should see your page.